So last time we talked about the creation story and Genesis at the very beginnings and the different versions of the Bible. And today we're going to get into God's calling to man. So after generations had left from the time of Adam, we get to a man named Abraham. And God calls Abraham, and he makes what's called a covenant or a promise. And this promise to Abraham is, if you will leave your family, trust me and follow me, I will give you certain things. And here were the tenets of the covenant that God made with the man named Abram at the time. His name will later be changed to Abraham. But the tenets are, I will give you a property, a piece of property. That's why they call it the promised land, because God promised it to them. At the moment, it's called the land of Canaan. The Canaanites live in this land. Canaan was a direct descendant of Noah. Remember, Noah has the child Ham, who gets into some trouble, and then Ham has Canaan. So the Canaanites live in the land of what we would call today Israel. So Israel is promised to Abraham. Also, God said, I will protect you. I will make you a great nation. That there will be that your numbers will be as multiple as the stars in the sky or the sand on the sea, and that you'll just be this great and wonderful nation. Also, that the Messiah will come from you. So those are the tenets. So the land was promised, protection was promised, that they would be a great nation, and that the Messiah would come from them. Those are the four major tenets of the promise or the covenant that was made to Abraham. So Abraham leaves his family. Him and Lot, his nephew, travels with him. And as they go to a land. Abraham brings his wife Sarah. And when they move, it doesn't take long before a famine hits the land, and he has to move to Egypt. And so when he goes into Egypt, Abraham has a serious problem. His wife is far too good looking. In fact, his wife is so good looking, he's afraid for his own life, because Pharaoh, and don't think of Pharaoh as a name that's like a title like king. The Pharaoh in the land would never marry a married woman. So he would fix that by killing the husband, and then she'd be single. And here's how marriage took place in this culture, is it was a business deal. Every woman had a male caretaker. So women belonged to a man. So usually it'd be your father. If your father had passed away, it'd be a brother. If you didn't have a brother, it'd be a cousin. But you belonged to a man if you were a woman. So if I wanted a woman, what I would do is I would make a deal with her father. She is irrelevant in this entire situation as far as what she wants. Now, if it's a good father, he would ask the daughter, what would you like to do? But it's a business deal. So when Abraham goes, he tells everyone, this is my sister. Well, that's actually a half-truth, because it is actually his half-sister. And so he tells everyone this is his half-sister. Pharaoh finds out there's this really good-looking woman, and so he takes her as his wife. Well, it doesn't take long for a plague to break out, and he realizes that the God of this woman must be angry. Now, you have to understand, Egypt and the other nations around believed in the Hebrew God. They believed in Yahweh. They believed he existed, but they believed he was one of many gods. So he was just another god. And so he understood that right when he took this woman, Sarah, that everything bad happened, so all the plagues break out, that she was really he's being cursed because of her. So he confronts Abraham and says, what did you do? You set me up. And also when he got, when Pharaoh took her as his bride, what he would do was make an offering or a dowry that he would pay to Abraham. So Abraham got rich. He sold his wife. And when he sells his wife, he gets a bunch of men servants, maid servants, cattle, just lots of things. And so he sells his wife. Well, then he gives his wife back, but he gets to keep the stuff. So now he's super rich. Now, I'm sure that'd be an awkward conversation with his wife as he goes back home because he sold her. Well, when he gets back home, him and Sarah have been promised that they will have a child, but they're not having a child. And what they eventually do is they come up with this scheme, and Sarah says, I can't have a kid. I mean, it's not happening, so let's help God out. And so Sarah gives Abraham one of her handmaidens, which is an Egyptian woman named Hagar. Now, you can only assume that he got an Egyptian handmaid from Pharaoh when he sold his wife. So Abraham tells a lie. He gets a handmaiden out of it. And then he goes back to his wife. And when they get back home, they try to help God out by sleeping with this handmaiden. She has a child. The child is named Ishmael. That's actually the first child of Abraham. And so when she has this child, Ishmael is now a child that Abraham has. And just to let you understand, the Quran agrees with this. And the Quran says that the Muslims say that they are direct descendants of Ishmael. Later on, Abraham's going to have another child named Isaac, and the Jews say they come from Isaac. So this is why you have this huge conflict in the Middle East, especially over Israel. Both sides say that this is promised to us from God. It's not as if we can go buy another piece of property and give it to the Palestinians or the Jews. It's not that they want a piece of property. They want that piece of property because they say that God promised it to them. So it's deeper than just land. And so anyways, later on, God sends a few angels and they talk to Abraham. And as they're talking, they tell Abraham and Sarah that she's going to have a child a year from now. Now I'm skipping a lot in these lectures, as I hope that you're keeping up with the reading, but just so that we can carry on with the story. But a year from then, Abraham and Sarah actually have a child, and that child's name is Isaac. Ishmael begins to pick on Isaac. Now, is that just brotherly love? You know, I had an older brother. He liked to pick on me sometimes. That's what older brothers do. But Sarah saw it as a threat because Ishmael would not be getting the inheritance because Ishmael was born of a slave woman. Well, Isaac was born of Abraham's actual wife. But if Isaac were to die some way, then Ishmael would receive the inheritance. So Sarah saw Ishmael as a threat, and she winds up telling Abraham, I want them gone. And so Hagar and Ishmael are kicked out of the home. Later, an angel comes to Abraham and says, I want you to go sacrifice your son, Isaac. Abraham, being faithful to God, takes Isaac out and takes him to the woods and begins to prepare for a sacrifice. And Isaac looks around and says, well, where is the sacrifice at? And Abraham says, God will provide. Then Abraham takes Isaac, bounds him up, and puts him down to sacrifice him, takes the knife, raises it up to sacrifice Isaac, and an angel of the Lord appeared and says, do not do it. So stops him. He says, I can see that you are faithful and that, that you trusted in God. And so he stops the sacrifice. At that point, they see a ram stuck in the thicket, and they go take the ram and they sacrifice that ram. So God did provide. Now this, to a Christian, would be what's called a shadow, where something happens in the Old Testament, but is really pointing to something that's going to happen in the New Testament. And of course, this would be a shadow of Jesus Christ, that He is the Lamb of God, that He is the one that God provides, and so He takes away our sin by being the sacrifice. How God, the Father, was willing to sacrifice His one and only begotten Son. And so this was a shadow of that. So Isaac goes back with Abraham. I'm sure that would be an awkward conversation. And just a little side note, another famine hits the land. Abraham takes his wife, Sarah, and sells her once again. He actually sells his wife twice. And still, once again, God intervenes and doesn't let anything happen with it. And so Sarah goes back to Abraham, but he gets to keep all the stuff. Now he's super rich. Isaac later gets married, and Isaac faces the problem after Abraham has passed away. Isaac faces the problem where there's a famine in the land. He actually goes to a land where the leader is named Abimelech and sells his wife. So it kind of runs in the family. Abimelech looks out the window before he is officially married to Isaac's wife, and sees Isaac caressing her, and then he realizes, oh, that's not his sister. He uses the same line that Abraham used, although that was an outright lie, because this was actually Isaac's first cousin, not his sister. But Abimelech realizes what's going on and says, you could have got me in a lot of trouble with your God. And so Isaac gets to keep all the stuff, and he gets to keep his wife. This runs in the family. They make a lot of money off of this. Isaac's wife actually gets pregnant, and she has twins. And while the twins are still inside of her, they begin to wrestle, and she goes to God and says, what is this? And God tells her that inside of you there are twins that are fighting, two different nations. And the older will serve the younger. Now, this is very odd in this day. In that day, the oldest got the inheritance, 2/3 of the inheritance. So let's say that there were 5 children born to one family. The oldest would get 2/3. The other 4 would split up the 1/3. And so in this, so the oldest got most of the inheritance. And so usually the younger children would be weaker in monetary value and stature. So the first child is born. His name is Esau, which means hairy. He was red and hairy, just a hairy guy. And as soon as he's born, the other twin is grasping onto his heel as he is being born. And so they call him heel grabber. And to say that in Hebrew is Yaakov, which we would say Jacob. And there's a euphemism in English, which we would say, you're pulling my leg, when you're talking about somebody who is conning you or tricking you or joking with you. And that's what Jacob is going to be, is a con man. Esau grows up to be a big, strong hunter, a man's man. He's the manly man, where Jacob is called smooth skin, and he stays at home. He's more of a thinker, and he'll outsmart people. One day, there's Esau is going out, and he comes back in, and he's tired, he's famished, and he says to Jacob, who's cooking some soup, he says, give me some of that soup. And Jacob says, I won't do that. You got to give me something. Sell me your birthright, which is that 2/3 of the inheritance, and I'll give you some of this soup. Now, it seems like Esau is a big, strong hunter, man's man, but not much of a thinker. And he agrees to it, and so he sells his birthright for some soup. Isaac is getting to the point where he knows he's about to pass away. He says his eyes are weak, he can't see anymore, and he tells Esau, go get some game for me and cook it the way I like it, and I'll give you your blessing. Now, in that day, God used this family line, and he would allow them to lay their hands on their children and give basically a prophecy. So this blessing would be a prophecy of what's going to happen to you in the future. And so Esau goes out to hunt some game and going to cook it up and get his blessing. Well, when Isaac's wife hears about this, when she hears that this is going to happen, she tells Jacob, I want you to pretend to be Esau and trick your father. I want you to get that blessing. And the reason why she wanted Isaac to get, going blank here, Jacob to get the blessing was because she had received that prophecy from the angel of the Lord that the older will serve the younger. So the younger was going to be more powerful. So he dresses up, he wears a bunch of goat hair, he smells like a goat, and they cook the game up real quick and bring it to Isaac. And Isaac doesn't believe it at first, says, you're not Esau, come here closer. And when he comes closer, he feels him, says, you're hairy like Esau, you smell like Esau. So apparently Esau feels like a goat, smells like a goat. And he gives the blessing to Jacob thinking it's Esau. And he tells him, you're going to be a great nation and God's going to protect you. All the same blessings that was given to Abraham, that was then given to Isaac, has now been given to Jacob. So it is passed through this line. And you're going to see this throughout the Old Testament. The God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Those are the patriarchs of the family of the Jews. That's where the promise began, was with Abraham, and it was passed on to Isaac, and it was passed on to Jacob. Even though Esau is a direct descendant of Isaac, he is not one of the promised line. Even though Abraham has other children, such as Ishmael, they are not the promised line. It is Abraham who is promised, then Isaac, and then Jacob. Now, all of Jacob's children, all 12 of Jacob's children are going to be the promised ones. But Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. Don't forget that line. And so Jacob receives the blessing. He then walks out of the room. Esau comes in, says, I'm ready for my blessing. That's when Isaac realizes what had happened. And that's when Esau gets very, Isaac says, I gave my blessing, I gave your blessing to your brother Jacob. Esau says, well, just give it again to me. And Isaac says, can't do that, because he realizes this is a prophecy from God. Therefore, God must have meant it to happen this way. Esau is enraged. So Jacob's mother says, I want you to go to my homeland and find you a good cousin, because these girls around here aren't good girls. And you need to get away from Esau, because Esau's ready to kill you. And remember, Jacob, more of the small guy, more of the thinker. Esau, the big, strong man, you didn't want to get in a fight with Esau. So Jacob runs away to the land of his mother. And when he gets to that land, he meets up with his uncle, which is named Laban. And Laban puts him to work. And so Jacob begins to work for Laban in the fields. Everything Jacob does is blessed. Everything Jacob touches is absolutely blessed. And Laban can see this. And so Laban goes to Jacob. He wants Jacob to continue to work for him. He says, you shouldn't be working for free, even though you're getting free housing and food and things like that. That's what he was actually working for. But he says, name your wages, and I'll give it to you. And Jacob thinks for a moment. He says, there is something that you have that I want. And he says, your daughter Rachel, that's what I want. And Laban says, all right, how about this? 7 years of manual labor, work in the fields, and I'll give you Rachel. So fellas, you have to think to yourself, have you ever met a girl that is actually worth 7 years of hard labor? Well, Jacob did. And so he's ready to work for Rachel. Now, Rachel has an older sister named Leah. And Leah, it says, is, it depends on what version of the Bible that you read, but it said lazy-eyed in some. It says that, that there's something different about Leah that Jacob did not like. So most thinks that she wasn't very attractive. Some think that there was actually something wrong with her eyes. We're not sure when how covered women were in that day. Could you only see their eyes? Is that what made someone attractive or not attractive? Whatever it is, Jacob is in love with Rachel, not Leah. So at the end of 7 years of manual labor, and everything Jacob does works out, he then goes to Laban and says, give me your daughter Rachel so that I may lay with her. Now I got to tell you fellas, the day that you're ready to go get married, I probably wouldn't say that to your father-in-law on the wedding day. But that's the way that Jacob approached Laban. And Laban sets up the wedding, and they have this big wedding. Now, weddings sometimes would last up to 7 days, especially if you had money. And you would be providing wine and food to everyone in town. You would just have this huge party. Well, that night, Jacob goes and he has his honeymoon night with his wife. And when he wakes up the next morning, he realizes it's Leah and it's not Rachel. So the obvious question is, how on earth can you not realize you're sleeping with your fiance's sister? Could have been dark. He could have been drunk. You just don't know. She would have been covered during the wedding, so you wouldn't have seen her face. But either way, he wakes up the next morning and he's got the wrong woman. So he goes to Laban and he is ticked off. And he confronts Laban. And Laban says, there's a rule around here that I have to marry off my older daughter before I can marry off my younger daughter. So I'll make you a deal, Jacob. If you'll work another 7 years, I'll give you Rachel. So fellas, you have to ask yourself this question. Have you ever met a woman who's worth 14 years of manual labor? Jacob agreed. Laban says, finish out your honeymoon week with Leah, and then I'll give you Rachel. So he finished out the week with Leah, then he received Rachel, but he still had to work off the 7 years. So he got Rachel before 14 years was up. But now this is an odd family dynamic. All right, girls, you have to ask yourself, how would you feel, first of all, if you were Leah? You weren't wanted by Jacob. Jacob wanted your sister. How would you feel about that? You did get to marry a rich man, but now you are actually used as a pawn. Next, when you find out that Rachel is also going to be married to your husband, how would you feel about being married at the same time that your sister is married to the same guy? How do you feel if you're Rachel? Jacob really wanted you, but your sister kind of got in the way. Like I said, very odd dynamic. These two sisters do not get along very well. Well, Leah winds up getting pregnant, and she has a child. In this day, women, your job was to have male children. That was seen as your job. If you weren't doing that, you weren't doing your job, and you were to blame. That's the way that was the mentality back in that day. And so Leah says, well, now Jacob's really going to love me because I have a male child. His name's Reuben, so the first ever child of Jacob. Jacob's going to have 12 children. These 12 children are going to be called the tribes of Israel. So the 12 tribes of Israel, and the reason why they're called the tribes of Israel, Jacob is going to have his name changed to Israel later on. So these 12 children are going to be born. The first one is named Reuben. Leah then has another child. So what I want you to get, Rachel's the prettiest one. Rachel's the favorite one. And he makes no bones about it, but he's still having kids with Leah. So Jacob is, likes to sleep with both of them. I don't know any other way to put it. So, Leah winds up having a third child, winds up having a fourth child, and Rachel can't take it anymore. Rachel's just not having children. So Rachel comes up with this plan, and she goes to Jacob and says, Jacob, sleep with my handmaiden. You have a child with her, and we'll call it my child. And so the handmaiden gets pregnant. Jacob agrees to this situation. So now Jacob is sleeping with Leah, Jacob is sleeping with Rachel, and Jacob is sleeping with Rachel's handmaiden. So she has a child, and Rachel says, well, now look who's winning this battle. It becomes a war of the babies. And so she says, look who's winning now. And the handmaiden actually winds up having another child. So I want you to also understand that Jacob did not stop sleeping with this handmaiden, even though he'd already had a child with her. Well, Leah has quit having children, and she gets quite jealous of Rachel. He says, oh, she's catching up with me. So she comes up with this idea, hey, Jacob, sleep with my handmaiden and have children by her, and we'll call it my child. Jacob agrees. You know, Jacob's just being passed around like a piece of meat here. So Jacob is sleeping with Rachel, Leah, and two different handmaidens. He gets his handmaiden pregnant. Winds up getting her pregnant twice. So you're having all these children being born, and Rachel has yet to have a child. Well, Leah one day is eating some fruit that her oldest son, Reuben, got for her. Name is called mandrakes. And there was this superstition during that day that mandrakes would make you fertile. So she's trying to get fertile, which is an awkward situation, that your son is bringing you fruit to try to get you fertile so that you can win the baby making contest with your dad, who he's actually sleeping with 3 other women at the same time, one of them being your aunt. Alright, so just a normal day in the Jewish neighborhood, I guess. So anyways, Rachel approaches Leah and says, "Give me some of that fruit." He says, "How dare you ask for this fruit? You take my husband." So you can already see the jealousy coming out. "Now you want to take the fruit that my son has brought to me." And Rachel says, "Here's the deal. I'll let you have Jacob tonight if you give me the fruit." And Leah agrees. So Rachel gets the fruit. Jacob comes home and she is told, "You're with Leah tonight." So, once again, he's just being passed around. And so she eats the fruit, and Jacob sleeps with Rachel, and she winds up getting pregnant, and she has a child named Joseph. Leah winds up later on having 2 more children, and then Rachel actually will later on have 1 more child. But before she has that final child, Jacob sees that he's got his family together. It's time for him to move on. Well, Laban does not want Jacob to move on because everything Jacob touches is blessed. And so he tells Jacob, "Look, I will let you start building your own income and getting money and livestock yourself if you don't leave." And so Jacob makes the deal. He says, "Here's the deal. Whenever a goat, whenever any of the livestock is born, if it has spots on it or stripes on it, it'll be mine. If it's solid color, it'll be yours, Laban." Laban agrees. Most of the livestock would have been solid colored. And so he agrees to it. And so here's Jacob's being a con man. Here's what he does. He begins to put white stripes of bark, so he'll peel off the inside of the trees, and he put it in the water trough. And here was his thinking. This is where a lot of the livestock mate. So the goats will mate in front of the water trough. If they look at white stripes, they'll come out striped. Absolutely stupid, okay? And medically, that's not going to work. I mean, I don't know if you've taken any anatomy classes or medical classes yet, but I hope you realize if you're looking at something spotted, you're not going to have spotted children. That's not the way it works. But everything Jacob does is blessed, no matter how dumb, no matter how weird, and even though he's a con man, God just blesses this family. And so he takes the biggest, strongest livestock and mates them in front of those stripes, and they come out striped. He takes the weaker, sicklier livestock and lets them mate on their own. They come out solid. So it works not because medically it should work, but because God is blessing. This comes back to one of those things, once again, that either the Bible is completely lying or this is supernatural. That's your only 2 ways to look at it. Either it's a complete lie or supernatural, because this doesn't just normally happen. So anyways, some of Laban's children start getting jealous when they see that Jacob's getting rich, and that should be their inheritance. Jacob can read the writing on the wall that his time there is ending, and so he packs up his family and he sneaks out because he knows Laban doesn't want him to leave. He runs off. Long story short, Laban comes after him, but God says, "Don't you touch that man. He is a blessed man." God also appears to Jacob. So Jacob sees this man. He doesn't know who this man is. And what Jacob had done is Jacob had ranked his wives. So he puts the least favorite handmaiden and her kids in front, then the next, then Leah and her kids, then Rachel and Joseph. He ranks them. And here was the thinking. He's going back to the land where Esau lives. And he doesn't know if Esau's still angry. And so his thinking is if Esau attacks, well, he'll get my least favorite kids and wife. And then I can take the rest of them and run away. If he ambushes me, maybe he'll get 2 families, but I'll still get my other 2 and leave. If he gets 3 of them, I'll still have my favorite Rachel and Joseph. And I'll be in the back in case he gets them all. Jacob, not the greatest of family men. So anyways, Jacob lingers in the back. And as he lingers in the back, he meets this man. And they begin to wrestle. That's all you get in the story. I don't know what happened. I don't know what provoked it. But they begin to wrestle. And it says that this man is kind of toiling with Jacob. And finally the man touches Jacob's hip. And when he touches Jacob's hip, it goes out of place. Jacob is now basically useless in this fight. But he holds on and he refuses to let go. The man says, "Let me go." And Jacob says, "Not till you bless me." And so the man blesses Jacob. The same blessing that he had received, that Abraham, Isaac, and now Jacob had received. And he says, "Your name is no longer Jacob, but Israel." And Israel means wrestles with God. So this is God that he wrestles with. Just a little side note, the Jews actually won't eat the hip of animals out of respect of what happened to Jacob on this day. So, God showed up to Jacob and blessed Jacob once again. Jacob meets up with his family. Esau's there when he gets back into the land of Israel. And Esau is there with open arms. He's over it. But Jacob's leery and he's not sure. So he actually moves his family away from Esau. And you'll see that he stays away from Esau basically because he's afraid. Rachel winds up having another kid. And his name, they're going to call him later on Benjamin. But Rachel actually dies giving birth to this child. So you have 12 children of Jacob. Those will be the 12 tribes of Israel. He does have at least one daughter that will that you'll read about. Women just aren't mentioned in the Bible. So it's very rare that a woman is mentioned. So it's not that he may have had lots of other daughters, but they just don't have status in that culture, so they're not talked about. Jacob makes no bones about it. His favorite kid is Joseph, which is the oldest of Rachel. He loves Joseph. In fact, he makes a special coat for Joseph and lets Joseph wear it. So Joseph is walking around with this coat of many colors, a very blessed guy. And the other brothers are jealous. Joseph winds up having a dream, and in the dream, he basically says, "You brothers, other brothers are going to bow down before me." Now he is the second youngest out of all of them, so no way are they ever going to bow down to him. Benjamin would be the youngest. So they get upset with Joseph. In fact, they get so upset that at one point they decide to kill him as he's walking out to check on them. As they're working in the field, which tells you he was not working in the field. He was getting to stay at home while they worked their tails off. He goes out, and they saw him from a distance, said, "Let's kill him." Well, Reuben, the oldest, is thinking we can't kill him. So Reuben says, "Well, let's just throw him in this cistern, this like empty well, and we'll go get him later." And Reuben was planning on getting him out later. When he gets there, they throw him in the cistern. And Reuben walks off to do whatever. The other brothers then see some merchants coming along. They say, "Well, why should we kill him and get nothing out of it? Let's sell him as a slave." And so the other brothers actually sell Joseph as a slave. When Reuben gets back, he finds out what's happened. Now he knows they're in trouble. So they take the coat of many colors, they rip it up and put some animal blood on it, and they bring it into the house to Jacob, their father, and say, "We found this coat. You know what this coat's from?" Of course, they knew where this coat was from. And Jacob said, "It's my son Joseph's coat." And that's when Jacob believes that he is killed by a wild animal, when actually he was sold in slavery. Through being passed off, Joseph winds up in Egypt. He winds up being the slave of Potiphar, which is head of the army. To make long story short, Potiphar's wife has the hots for Joseph, comes after Joseph. Joseph refuses her to the point she finally screams that he raped me. Joseph gets thrown into prison. Everything Joseph does is blessed. So he had risen up as the head slave in Potiphar's house. Now he's thrown into prison. He rises up to be the head man in prison. And a couple of men have dreams, and he interprets these dreams. To one guy, he said, "You're going to be restored to your position. You're going to get out of this place." To the other guy, he said, "You're going to die in this prison." Both dreams came true. And so when the one man got out, later on, Pharaoh in Egypt has this dream, and he doesn't understand what the dream means. And so he has this dream where there's these 7 fat, healthy, really good-looking cows, and then these 7 sickly, skinny cows come up and eat the fat cows. And he says, what is this all about? So he calls all of his magicians and all of the star readers and basically his dream team to come in and interpret this dream, but none of them can interpret the dream. That's when the man who got out of prison because of Joseph's interpretation of the dream says, I know a guy who can interpret dreams. His name's Joseph, that Hebrew guy back in prison. So they call for Joseph to come out, and he says, here's what the dream means. There's going to be 7 years of abundance, then 7 years of famine. And so Pharaoh brings him out and makes him one of the top guys in all of the land of Egypt. So he has moved up everywhere he's went. He's blessed everywhere he goes. Later on, a famine hits Israel. And so Jacob sends 10 of his children out to get food. He left Benjamin because he doesn't want anything to happen to Benjamin. Benjamin is now his favorite. 10 kids come. And Joseph recognizes them immediately. They do not recognize Joseph. Joseph talks through an interpreter. So Joseph is speaking Egyptian, and a Hebrew is speaking Hebrew to the Hebrews. And of course, Joseph can really understand what they're saying. But he's trying to figure out what he wants to do at this moment. I'm sure he's angry, but I'm sure at the same time he's happy to see his family. So he's going through these emotions. He basically asked, do you have a father? How is he? Do you have any other brothers? Because he knows that his youngest, his full brother, Benjamin, is not with them. Benjamin had nothing to do with the selling off of him. So Benjamin he has no ill will to Benjamin. Benjamin was too young at the time. And so they said yes. And he said, I think you guys are really spies. So here's what I'll do. I'll keep one of you as prisoners, Simeon. And the others you go back home and bring the younger brother with you, and then I'll let you go on your way. So they agree. They have to. They have no other choice. They pay for the food and they leave. Well, Joseph actually puts the money back in their sacks, and when they get home, they realize, uh-oh, we didn't pay. He's going to think we stole it. He's going to think we really are spies. They say, we need to bring Benjamin back. Jacob refuses, says, I won't let it happen. I won't lose my favorite kid. Well, they eat up all the food, yet their famine remains. Now they're in a desperate situation. They say to their father Jacob, we got to go back. We're going to die. Jacob finally agrees, and so Benjamin goes back with them. As they get back, that's when Joseph finally, and once again, I'm really skimming through this. You need to be keeping up with the reading. But Joseph reveals himself. They're in shock and they're afraid. And Joseph says, what you meant for bad, God meant for good. And so had he not been sold off into slavery, then no one would have known in Egypt about the famine. And they wouldn't have had all this food that kept the people surviving. So what he was saying is God knew all this was going to happen. God orchestrated all this. Even though you did something bad, God turned it into a blessing and something good. That all of this would not have taken place if you hadn't sold me off into slavery. Once again, long story short, he says, go back, get Dad, come live in this land because we are well taken care of. So they go, they get Jacob, and they bring all of the clan to Egypt. And what I want you to get, Pharaoh loves Jacob. Pharaoh loves Joseph because of all that Joseph has kept Egypt from. And so he takes care of the Hebrew people. They come to Egypt on good terms. They live off in a land called Goshen. And that's the end of the book of Genesis, where they are living in the land on good terms. What we're going to find in the beginning of Exodus, things change. The next Pharaoh does not look at them on good terms. They wind up becoming slaves, and they're slaves for 400 years. So later on, it turns bad. But at the beginning of their move to Egypt, they leave on good terms and they are saved. So that is the end of the book of Genesis. Like I said, I really skimmed through it, but keep up with the readings. This is the beginnings of the Bible, and all of the rest of what you read will be based on the God of the book of Genesis. So until our next lectures, keep on reading.